I'm Chris Fowler for Sports Century. He came into a game like Wyatt Earp striding toward the OK Corral. He had a menacing mustache, a dark-eyed scowl, and a flair for the flamboyant. Dennis Eckersley was, in other words, meant to be a reliever. Yet the side-arming right-hander excelled in that role only after 12 years as a stylish but sometimes sporadic starter. In Oakland in the late 1980s, he found a home and he found himself. The ball seemed to obey him. His control was such that he referred to himself as the paint master. But first, he had to gain control of himself.
He was kind of the car keys reliever. When Eckersley comes to the mound, people start reaching for their car keys.
As soon as he came in the game, the guys that wrote the newspapers just started doing the story right there.
He was so dominant because he had such great control.
He could paint.
It almost looked like he just was looking through one eye. He closed the other eye. It looked like he was shooting a gun.
He hit a gnat's ass with a pitch. He got a reputation from umpires where he couldn't walk anybody.
I said, Eck, the last 2 years, you have allowed fewer base runners than you have saves. And he looks at me and he goes, if anyone ever does that again, I'll kiss your ass.
He got him and the ball game is over.
He kind of fashioned an image for himself. He reminded me like one of the musketeers coming out there. Okay, zip, zip, zip.
Struck him out.
It's not even Eckersley, it's the Eck. It's like facing Elvis.
This was like Muhammad Ali as a closer. You know how Muhammad used to pick the round in poetry and then do it in the fight? Well, Eck was kind of like that. He was going to pick how many pitches he was going to strike you out on and then do it.
I didn't like it when he would strike somebody out and shoot them as they're going back to dugout, or when he would do that thing with his hip when he would get the third out of a game. Drove me crazy. I hated him.
Am I supposed to wave to the guys going, how's the wife and kids? I had a chip on my shoulder. I didn't like who I played against.
In the bottom of the ninth inning of Game 1 of the 1988 World Series, Dennis Eckersley disposed of the first two Dodgers. But then the reliever with the unerring control walked pinch hitter Mike Davis, just the 14th base on balls he issued all year. It allowed a gimpy Kirk Gibson to bat.
When you come to a one-run game in the World Series, first of all, you're trying to calm down. Sometimes you don't even realize who's coming up. You just sort of get there, and then, oh, he's up.
I saw Gibby coming up the steps of the dugout with a bat, and he used the bat as a cane.
It took a half an hour for Gibson to get there. Even then, I wasn't really concerned.
Eckersley is throwing him pitches, and he's swinging and fouling them off. It was almost remorseful to watch. I mean, it was sad. It was sickening.
4-3 A's, 2 out, ninth inning, 3-2.
Eckersley's looking right back at me and saying, I got you. So I said, well, we'll see.
Gibson swings and a fly ball to deep right field. This is going to be a home run. Unbelievable!
Everybody standing up, just ecstatic. And you're the opposite end of this whole deal. And you're almost looking for somebody to make eye contact with, and everybody's ducking you. It's a lonely feeling. The team has got the game won for 9 innings, and then you come in and throw something, and the guy juices you. It's such a responsibility behind that, and it's not easily forgotten.
Where do you go from there? Well, in '89, he was getting the last out in the World Championship, and in '92, several years later, he's the MVP Cy Young.
The casual fan remember, hey, Dennis Eckersley, he's the guy who allowed that long home run to Kirk Gibson. And the fact that Eckersley saved almost 400 games and won 200 kind of falls through the woodwork.
From 1988 through 1995, Eckersley walked only 75, while striking out 545 and averaging 38 saves a season. Yet behind that sneering swagger festered a phobia.
He looked at me and he goes, I am scared to death to fail, so I am not going to go out there and fail because that will just crush me, and I'm not going to let that happen.
He was a nervous wreck. You just go look in his locker before we went and pitch. He had probably 35 cigarette butts. I knew it. The more nervous he was, the better he was going to pitch.
If you act confident, then everybody thinks that you're not scared. And it sort of worked. The next thing you know, I started believing it.
Confronting his fears on the mound was easy compared to the demons Eckersley faced away from the ballpark.
Dennis could always differentiate. This is life. This is a game. He had much larger struggles in his life than giving up a dinger in the ninth.
Dennis Eckersley was born October 3rd, 1954 in Oakland, California, the middle child of Wallace, a warehouse foreman, and Bernice. Growing up in nearby Fremont, he and his older brother Glenn were inseparable.
We lived in the same room. We had bunk beds, and I was on the top and he was on the bottom. You could talk to him any time of the day. I was there for him, and that was the way we were.
The two boys both loved sports. They used to go over to school and knock balls around. They played basketball on the garage out here and football in the street.
We'd go to the schoolyard, and I'd pick him first. And we played on the same little league teams and the pony league teams and high school team.
When your brother's 2 years older, he's a great player because you're so much bigger and stronger. So I remember just being like, can you let me play with you guys?
At Washington High School, Dennis played 3 sports, starring in baseball. His brother had a different priority.
I started drinking when I was 12. At one stage of the game, I was about 15 and Dennis was about 13, and I know we got drunk together at that time.
Dennis was involved in sports. He's not going out and get drunk all the time. And Glenn had nothing else to do.
Dennis got drafted 3rd round to the Cleveland Indians. And I remember he got 35K. And he went out and bought himself a nice blue Challenger.
I was so proud of what he did and what he accomplished, but it was difficult. You'd still hear all the gossip back and forth and whatever happened to you and that kind of thing. It does hurt a little bit, to be perfectly honest.
The brothers grew apart, Glenn marrying and moving away. Dennis embarked on a promising baseball career. Despite objections from the front office, Eckersley, only 20, made the Cleveland Indians in 1975 at the insistence of first-year manager Frank Robinson. He shut out his hometown team, the A's, part of a run of 28 2/3 scoreless innings, a record to start a major league career.
It was amazing. Then he started calling himself the Ace after that.
At that point in my career, every time I used to go to the mound, I wanted to throw a no-hitter. As soon as the guy would get a hit, I'd go, oh.
Memorial Day '77, I was covering the Angels. It was a great game because Frank Tanana was pitching for the Angels, and he was just as cocky as Eckersley. They would come off the mound taunting each other.
I remember at one point about the 7th inning, I said, heck, forget about Tanana. Don't waste your energy on yelling at him. And he looked at me and he went, this is my no-hitter. I'll act any way I want.
So there's 2 outs, and this guy, Gil Flores, is the last out. And so he's taking his time. He's looking around, and it's like, I had enough. You know what I mean? So I said, get in there. They're not here to take your pitcher. You're the last out. Get in there.
In all, Eckersley was literally unhittable for 21 consecutive innings, only 3 shy of Cy Young's record. Still, there were doubters.
Because of the violent act in which he did throw. There was a lot of skeptics out there that thought that he was going to have some arm problems along the way.
Even though he had 40 wins his first 3 seasons, Eckersley was traded by the Indians to Boston just before the start of the 1978 season. The circumstances behind his departure reportedly revolved around his teammate and close friend, Rick Manning.
My wife, Denise, and I were not getting along. So when I got traded, I called home, and I remember she said she didn't love me anymore. I was like, whoa. I was crushed. It was one of the most devastating times in my entire life. I kept wondering, back then, like, what was it? Is it somebody else? And it took a long time, but finally it came out. She had fallen in love with Rick Manning.
The Indians were very conservative, and if there was any kind of scandal, they were liable to send you packing just to avoid the embarrassment.
No one ever came to me from the front office and said, hey, we got to get rid of this guy because of these things that are going on. It may have, who knows, because I know Manning stayed and Eckersley went.
We used to think, is that going to hit him? Will he drill it? And then there was one game in Cleveland where he literally threw one where Manning's helmet went up, his head went down, and the ball went right between the helmet and the head.
That would have been really tough, having to still play there under those circumstances. But life's gone on, and they ended up getting married. We have Mandy in common. She's like got two fathers.
I could look at him right now, and he would be the exact same to me as we were back in 1972.
Refocused on the mound with the Red Sox, Eckersley had his best season as a starter.
Strike three. Dennis Eckersley has won his 20th game.
He won 17 the following season and married a model, Nancy O'Neill, in 1980. But beneath this success were ominous signs.
And there was a day when he gave up 6 home runs in Yankee Stadium, and I wrote that as he was whirling around the mound watching the home runs, he looked like he was dancing at Studio 54, and the next day he was really angry with me. Turned out that's where he was, really late into the night.
From 1980 to 1983, Eckersley was 5 games under 500. In May of 1984, when he was unable to pull out of his tailspin, Eck was moved to the Cubs in a trade that sent Bill Buckner to Boston.
I needed a new environment anyway. The way things were going, I didn't have a good year last year, and I wasn't going anywhere here.
I watched the performance of Dennis Eckersley start to deteriorate and wondered, as all of us did, why this is happening. And then we found out the whole story. It's a much more difficult foe to defeat than anybody standing in the batter's box.
In the early 80s was a wild time in sports. Dennis Eckersley was a wild kid. Alcohol was very much the lifestyle, and Eck had a lot of fun.
It's easy to go back and say when it became a problem, probably a problem right away.
I'd been out to dinner many times with Eck where I knew at the end of the night he had had too much to drink. I didn't know that it was a day after day after day problem.
The day that it becomes a problem is the day you don't want people to know how much you drank.
He would get to the point where he was forever hiding alcohol, and there were times when he couldn't even talk to his daughter, or sometimes he'd be falling down.
I remember one time that I said, "Give me a double." I felt uncomfortable with it. Like, that's not right.
He would state, if you win, you have to celebrate your victory. If you lose, you have to drown your sorrow. I think he enjoyed the opportunity to either win or lose.
In '86, the baseball people were saying his arm is gone, he's drinking too much, he's washed up. No one ever thought Dennis was going to go to the Hall of Fame, especially in the mid-'80s.
In 1986, Dennis Eckersley went 6-11 for the Cubs. His personal life was also in shambles. Just in time, he had an epiphany.
Christmas of '86, took my daughter to my sister-in-law's house, and I just tied one on. Just drank, I don't know, whatever. I just drank a ton. And when I woke up the next morning, my sister-in-law had a videotape of the night before, focused on me. What an awakening to see yourself like that.
Well, I made a comment to my stepmother saying that, I didn't like Dad like that, and I didn't want to see him like that. It made me uncomfortable.
My wife told me what she said, and it just went to my gut. That was the telling moment. It's like, did you get sober for your daughter? Oh, kind of. But ultimately, you get sober for yourself.
Forced to confront himself after seeing his drunkenness, Eckersley checked into Edge Hill Newport, a treatment center in Rhode Island. He stayed 6 weeks.
He called the experience very painful, but he also said that the pain allowed him to restore his life. He said it was just the grind that they put you under. I mean, you really have to peer into yourself.
When he came clean on his alcoholism, he was just sick and tired of pitching with hangovers, or he's sick and tired of needing a drink in his hand to feel good about himself.
Eckersley received another chance with another team. Just before the 1987 season, he was traded to the Oakland A's.
And I remember when they came in and said, well, we got Dennis Eckersley, and I said, well, is that the best you could do?
The first conversation was literally, we've got 5 guys we're going to start the season with. We'll use you out of the bullpen. He had that look in his face like, man, I'm not buying it.
Michael, he said, I am scared to death that once I go into the bullpen, I'll never come out.
Eckersley went to the bullpen and also stayed sober. His brother, however, was in free fall.
I checked out of life. I just quit the job, quit it all, and just drank. I made it to the Skid Row bum stage. Living on the street. Don't take a shower for 4 or 5 days. Panhandling.
Dennis had seen what his brother went through, and he feels for him. He tries to help him, but, well, he's playing ball, and he can't really be there for him.
Every once in a while, I'd go to a ballpark where he'd be in town. We'd visit for a few minutes, and then it'd be done, because I was just not what he wanted me to be.
When he did come around, I was really anxious, and I wanted him to leave right away.
I'd pick up a sports page and find out what Dennis is doing, and just be amazed that he's doing what he's doing. And we started out the same way in life.
Glenn Eckersley hit bottom in 1987 when he was arrested for second-degree attempted murder, second-degree kidnapping, and aggravated robbery of a 60-year-old woman in Colorado Springs.
My brother was going to trial, and I think that was the time that I finally said, I've got to say something.
He was the only one that testified that day. He came into the courtroom, we hugged each other, and it was really emotional, and he said he'd do whatever he could do.
Dennis testified what alcohol had done to both of them, and how it had made his brother someone different than he really was.
They were just trying to embellish his alcoholism, saying he was an alcoholic, as if that was a very good defense.
By testifying on his brother's behalf, Eckersley made public his alcoholism. But it didn't help Glenn in his involuntary intoxication defense. He was found guilty and is serving a 40-year term.
They both were alcoholics. It's in the family. My wife's father, probably, he was an alcoholic. I've had uncles that was alcoholics.
All I know is it runs in my family. Maybe it skips a generation, who knows? The thing about the disease is that I think it affects everybody.
The beauty of Eckersley, he is a flawed guy. We know he's had his problems with alcohol. He feared failure. He worried so much about falling back to that place he came from that it drove him, and it drove him to be the best in the game.
Dennis Eckersley started an All-Star Game. He threw a no-hitter. He won 20 games as a starter. He won a Cy Young and an MVP as a reliever. And that uniqueness is what puts him in the Hall of Fame.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone!
Dennis was such a great pitcher. One blot on his escutcheon would not demean him in any way, shape, or form. You want to talk about living with pain. How about Ralph Branca, who served up the home run ball to Bobby Thompson?
Now, I understood Eckersley's feeling, to throw a home run in a crucial situation. I mean, you feel lower than a skunk. If I was a drinking man, I would have gone to drink. He stayed the path.
Somebody driving by him on the highway recognized him. They rolled down the window, and they yelled out 2 words, Kirk Gibson. And Eckersley just laughed.
I was 2 years sober, and I was thrilled. I was appreciative enough to know where I'd come. And so for me to look at it like, poor me, you kidding me? Poor me, I'm a new man.
And I said, Eck, that has to be the most humiliating moment of your career. He says, you know something? It really isn't. When I gave up the home run to Roberto Alomar in the 1992 ALCS, I was established. I was the MVP. I went home and cried all night.
It's going to be tough to sleep tonight. This doesn't happen very often.
He's given up 2 of the biggest home runs in playoff history, to Gibson and to Alomar, and he stood at his locker, and they came in waves.
It actually raised him in the estimation both of teammates and the media who covered it, because after that game, he just sat there explaining that one backdoor slider.
When he blew a save, it was like group therapy at his locker. They were fascinating sessions where he, it was almost like, I'm Dennis and I blew a save.
I think recovering from alcoholism taught him humility.
Traded by Oakland to St. Louis before the 1996 season, Dennis Eckersley amassed 66 saves the next 2 years. Returning to Boston as a free agent, he set the record for most appearances by a pitcher, 1,071. On that high note, he retired after the 1998 season, having amassed 390 saves and 197 wins.
I never saw a guy get more pleasure out of the game. I talked to him in the clubhouse and his feet were up and nobody was around him. And I said, what's it going to be like without this? And he said, it's going to be like dying.
Eckersley was elected to the Hall of Fame on the first ballot in January of 2004, joining Raleigh Fingers and Hoyt Wilhelm as the only firemen in Cooperstown.
Today, I'm glad I'm sober, and nothing could have happened without that. And I got a second chance, man, and I made the most of it.
I was in my room watching ESPN, and the bottom line came on, and I said, whoa. The inmates in here came by, and it was heavy. When I got on the phone with him, we couldn't talk for very long.
I feel great about having a relationship with my brother again because he's a changed man. Part of being sober is helping somebody else. It juices me when that happens.
Fighting to stay sober since '87, Eckersley enters the Hall of Fame a changed man, but not without scars. After 23 years of marriage, he and Nancy are planning to divorce.
I went through a lot, man. You know, it wasn't all like, yay! It took its toll on marriages. It took its toll on having a normal family life. And I've got the Hall of Fame to show for it. It validates, for me, what I did.
You don't just say, oh, well, I don't drink anymore. He follows through, and he's working on it day by day.
It was really exciting to see that when you make positive changes in your life, look at all the amazing positive things that can happen to you. His life is testament to that.
Dennis Eckersley, in concert with a Cleveland teammate, pitcher Pat Dobson, widened the lexicon of the game. From that collaboration was born X-Speak. Over the years, Eckersley popularized such words as yacker for a sharp curve, cheese for a fastball, oil for alcohol, and walk-off for a game-winning homer. A pitcher who had lost his stuff was said to be salad because he was just tossing it up there. As a reliever, Eck was rarely salad, and once he conquered oil, he was able to redeem and reinvent himself. For Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.